I'll start recording. All right, everybody. We have with us Varun Maheshwari. Hi, Varun. Welcome.
Hey Vasco.
And we have for you guys today a completely different offering. Usually you hear podcast episodes here on YouTube, but today we are going to talk about coaching. And actually, we're going to do a demonstration of a coaching session with Varun here. And we'll go through a kind of a script that I have ready. And the most important thing for those of you following is that we will be discussing a real case. And I will share all of the material that I've created in the link below the video, so you can follow along and then you can download the template for the coaching session and use it yourself. I think the most important aspect here is that this is a demonstration of a coaching process, which is something that we as Scrum Masters need to do on a regular basis. And what does coaching mean? Coaching starts with a few core beliefs, and the core beliefs that I have as a coach is that people change themselves. You can't tell them what to do. You can only help them discover what they want to do. Change takes time, so don't be frustrated. Insist but be patient, because it is the coachee's responsibility to figure out what to do next. And then finally, change takes time and support, and the coaching session is here to provide that support. The coaching clients that I work with have access to WhatsApp if they have quick questions to answer, and of course also a private Slack where they can discuss with me, and also a big community of people that follow the podcast and have been in coaching sessions, at least some of them. All right, without further ado, we'll jump into the case that Varun will give us. So let's start with the overview of what's going on. What have you observed, Varun?
So and this is a scenario like 2 years ago or maybe more. So what I observed was I was the so-called change manager, Scrum Master for the team, and they were doing agile or Scrum bits in bits and pieces, yeah, where they have all the ceremonies and the product backlog and sprint backlog and sprint review, etc., etc. But still, it was more of kind of mechanical Scrum, yeah, and
What do you
stakeholders.
mean by mechanical Scrum, Varun?
So what I mean by mechanical Scrum is you are doing Scrum in the name only, where you have the ceremonies, but you don't have a sprint goal, concrete sprint goal. And at the sprint review time, people think that is there anything to demonstrate or show, anything to get feedback on. That is my definition of mechanical Scrum.
What was that all the time, or sometimes they didn't have a sprint goal and they didn't have something to demo?
So sprint goal was, I would say, all the time. Yeah. So and sprint review thing was roughly 70-80% of the time. So yeah. So that was the case, and I was the Scrum Master and the change manager there. And the real question which stakeholders were asking, not only me but the team as well, that we are doing this agile bit. How are we improving?
Can you explain a bit better where that question came from at the time? Like, was it like a manager was coming to you? Was it like the team lead was asking from the team? Like, what was the context of that question?
So he was a sponsor, project sponsor, business sponsor, yeah, and it came from him basically, that I have set up the agile team. I have hired a Scrum Master, and now we are doing this Scrum, and I'm not sure how we are improving, because it looks like
So
things are.
the business sponsor was kind of wondering if the decision he had made of adopting agile in that team had a positive impact on the team. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yeah, I mean, but I would say I would take it a step further, and I think it was more of that we are doing agile, but we are not doing it properly, so we are not getting outcomes.
Was that what the sponsor said, or was that your interpretation of what he had said?
That was my interpretation initially. That was my interpretation. Yeah.
Okay, so the sponsor is asking, how are we improving? The team is doing what you called mechanical scrum. How does all of this affect the team? How are they reacting at the time? How were they reacting to both the things that were not there? What was the impact of those, as well as to the questions asked by the sponsor?
So the team was so it was a kind of tug of war between the team and the business, so to speak. Yeah, where business is expecting something, some outcomes, business outcomes, and team is kind of justifying themselves that they are doing good because they are doing Scrum, because they have a product backlog, because they have a sprint, because they have a sprint review and whatnot. So that was a kind of frustrating or a bit of concern for the team.
So was it, do I understand correctly that the team's expectation was that by adopting Agile, they would keep the sponsors happy? And that's why they did it, perhaps, at least in part. But the team wasn't expecting, if I read you correctly, that they would be called into account, i.e., held accountable for the impact, the benefits of adopting Scrum.
So first of all, they have not chosen agile. It was inflicted onto them that you
And
have to work in an agile way, agile manner. And then, as it most of the times happens, that when you start working in an agile manner, you start with Scrum, the de facto standard which has become. So yeah, so that was the case.
so when they were pushed into Agile, was it so that implicitly they understood that it's enough for us to adopt this process and the stakeholders will leave us in peace?
To some it was, to some it was even worse, that why they are asking us to do these things, why they are asking us to do these things, yeah, without telling us the context. When I say context, I mean that okay, these are the business problems we are having, and we are trying to solve these problems via agile. So agile is a tool which you use to solve some business problems.
But that's
Yeah.
not how the
So
team saw it, right?
some people saw it that way. Some people were like, okay, I have been told to do and I'll do it. Simple, my job done.
Okay, so we have this context where the team was asked to adopt Agile.
Right.
They were not told why necessarily. Some of the team members perhaps understood why, others didn't. But the outcome was that the team adopted what you called mechanical Scrum. So they did the ceremonies, but they weren't really looking at the impact of Scrum in those reasons to adopt Agile. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
And the sponsors were looking at the reasons, and they saw the team adopting Agile, at least the ceremonies were there, and they were
Yep.
asking, well, they've adopted Agile, why aren't they improving?
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so at least for now, we can establish that there was a mismatch in expectations, at least for some of the team members. Some team members thought that they were asked to adopt Agile as a process, not as a solution for some business problems. Therefore, they didn't measure the impact on those business problems, while the sponsors thought that they were asking the team to solve the business problems with Agile, because implicitly they thought that was the right solution, but they
Mm-hmm.
never shared the business problems with the team. Is that what was the case?
Yes. Yes. And yeah, I think you have covered it well. You have covered it well. To summarize it, it was like do agile without telling the reason. That's the one liner thing. Do
Yeah,
agile
it's the Nike
without telling the
Agile,
reason.
right? Just do it.
Yeah. Exactly. Nike Agile, just do it.
Here's the process. Just do it.
Correct. And now I have come to this like conclusion or this thinking that whenever someone says let's do agile, immediately a thought comes to my mind. Let's do screwdriver, because screwdriver is a tool you use to fix something. Yeah. So
And
agile is a tool.
in fact, actually, that's a great analogy. Although it is, of course, sarcastic, it's also appropriate for us to do a self-reflection. We could do this, like if I hear the sponsor say agile, and if I
Yep.
substitute agile with screwdriver, would the phrase still work? And if the phrase still works, then obviously it's the wrong phrase, because agile is not just a tool, it's a tool with a specific expected impact, right? And if the impact
Correct.
is not mentioned, perhaps even ignored, then agile may not be the right solution.
Absolutely. And that is why the complete equation is let's let's use agile to solve this problem. That's the complete equation.
Or rather, may I suggest that rather than say, let's use agile to solve this problem, why not just say, hey, let's solve this problem. By the way, we can try agile.
Even
Right?
better.
Because
Even better.
one of the things we want, us as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, one of the things we want is for the team to take ownership of solving a problem. We don't want them to take ownership of doing a ceremony, because you can do a ceremony without having any impact, right? This is what you call
Absolutely.
mechanical Scrum. So we really want to give the problem to the team, and of course a set of parameters, right?
Yep.
Like give the problem to the team and say, hey, you're 5 to 9 people, so 7 plus minus 2.
Right.
You have to show progress every 2 weeks, right? Like we don't need to do much more than that, and Scrum is almost immediately in place. And then if you put an Agile coach or a Scrum Master there with the team, very quickly they will converge into Scrum through the use of retrospective and constant or continuous improvement, right?
I just have
So
to say one more thing there. That when stakeholders say that here's a team and you have to show progress every 2 weeks, what that actually sometimes turns out to be that I have a project plan. Let's divide it into sprints and let's show progress via demo. Yeah,
yeah,
which
that's
which
actually
defeats the entire purpose.
absolutely, that's a great point, actually. We have to therefore define what progress is. A very simple
Exactly.
way to do it is to say the product owner decides whether we've had progress. Because that's
Correct.
actually the role of the product owner, right? The product owner, as the advocate of the customer, comes
Yep.
in and says, yes, this helps the customer. Oh, no, sorry, this does not help the customer. Here's why. What else could we do? Right? Like, so that's a very good point, and something that we can use as kind of a rule of thumb, or even a simple tool. We can develop more complex tools later on. Is we can work with the product owner to properly and to a certain extent even numerically assess progress, right? Like, I mean,
Hmm.
numerically in the case of maybe we're working on conversion rates or costs or whatever, and
Yep.
other times it's not numerically possible to measure progress, but then we ask the product owner's opinion.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
this links to one of the other questions that you had and already asked about this case, which is, what is the problem we have to solve? Did you have at that time any insight from the sponsor about what was the problem that they wanted to solve?
So I had this discussion with the stakeholder, with the sponsor, and what he told me was that I have these priorities, and to my surprise, there were 18 priorities. Yeah. So
Very common
so
as well.
yeah. So I have these 18 priorities, and I want all of the teams under me, yeah, uh, deliver on those priorities.
So the
Yeah. So
basic aspect was alignment to priorities that the sponsor.
alignment to priorities. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And one more thing was, now that I'm thinking in retrospect, was that if you have 18 priorities, I'm sure you will not have 18 business goals. Yeah, I'm sure.
Typically, you don't have 18 business goals. No, yes.
Yeah. So so somewhere something is missing, some link is broken.
Yeah, actually, that is a good point. So, um, if we think about this logically, right? Like,
Yeah,
let's say we have a business, we want the business to succeed. Let's start from there because that's an important premise. So we want the business to succeed. And when we do, we typically have a strategy to get to that successful outcome, right? Like increase sales, increase customer satisfaction, reduce costs, increase price, whatever that is. It's typically a
right.
very clear strategy. Maybe it has 1, 2, or 3 points that we need to focus on. And it's really critical to be able to translate that strategy into something applicable in product and service development, right? Because let's say
Right.
if we want to acquire more customers, what does that mean for the product? Sometimes it means nothing, right? That sometimes it means we change the marketing process, or we hire a new marketing manager, or we start doing advertising, or it could be a number of other things that doesn't necessarily relate to the product. But when it does relate to the product, we need to be able to trace that back to the to the business goal. Sorry, as you said. How do you feel about that team? Were they having that conversation between what were the priorities for them as a development team and how they linked to the business goals?
When I started, no. When I started that time, there was absolutely zero discussion about are we moving any dial on the business. That was mainly that we have to deliver whatever projects we are, whatever projects they are in pipeline. Yeah. So yeah, initially it was that.
So this was basically a shopping list team. Shopping list is the term that I use. So they were basically giving a list of things and said, no, now go shopping. And then they came back and they brought the kilo of tomatoes and the sponsor would go like, I didn't ask for those tomatoes. I asked for some other tomatoes. But the list only said
Exactly, exactly.
tomatoes, right? Because we were
Yeah,
not looking for the impact. And that's a very important aspect, actually. A lot of the teams that I've worked with in the past are, in practice, these shopping list teams. They are just given a shopping list without any context, not saying, are we preparing a breakfast, a lunch, an afternoon snack, a picnic, a banquet? There's no context whatsoever. Here's the shopping list.
correct.
What? Just go and shop, right? And
Exactly.
obviously, when you go to a shop, there's a lot of options for the same product.
Same product is absolutely. And again, to my surprise, what the product owner has done has taken his I mean the stakeholders those priorities and put them into sprints,
Oh, so partition them into sprints. So like a
partition them into
waterfall
sprints.
project.
Exactly, exactly. So that was happening, and it was like when I joined, it was the situation. Then I slowly and gradually changed the dynamic in terms of first question was in the sprint
Okay,
sprint
before we go there, so
yeah,
we know that you changed the dynamic, but
yep,
let's quickly review that we have the same case in mind here. So I've documented what you shared. So you were the change manager for the team, and the team was doing agile in bits and pieces, more like mechanical Scrum. They were missing critical aspects like the sprint goal, which, of course, after our conversation so far, seems pretty logical since they had no goal. And
yep.
sometimes they had nothing to demo. And as far as I understood, nobody really complained about it.
Except the stakeholder.
All right. So then the last part, and perhaps this is something that I'm still missing here.
Yeah,
The sponsor was asking, how are we improving? So this
yeah.
implicitly tells me that the sponsor had a goal in mind and the sponsor was not seeing progress towards that goal. In retrospect, do you think that was the case?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we can unpack this statement. How are we improving? So if we elaborate this, it will turn out to be how are we improving in terms of our delivery, in terms of teams owning the work, and in terms of uh, business hypothesis testing.
So did that come out in your conversations with the sponsor, these aspects of improvement?
Yes,
So
yes.
what kind of conversations did you have with the sponsor that led you to break down improving into these three different aspects?
Right. So I had this discussion with him about the general, what's that? What's the business reason for us to do agile? Yeah. And what is that you want me to do? Yeah. You have hired me. So what specifically you want me to do, or what are the outcomes you are looking for? And he said, and I remember this very clearly. He said that we are delivering very slow. Yeah. Which means we have to improve on our delivery, and we have so many things in work that even I am confused as to which team is working on what. So it's more of focus on output rather than outcomes. And the hypothesis testing part was that we have so many projects in pipeline. What if 20% or 30% of them fail? Are we testing? Are we not testing? Things like that.
Okay, so this raises to me the impression that the sponsor had an implicit expectation, and the sponsor was even able to verbalize some aspects of that expectation to you.
Yes.
Why were they not able to verbalize that to the team and the product owners?
Now that I am thinking, I think it's very clear because no one has asked these questions. For example, no one has asked the question, we have done one or two sprints. Why do we think those sprints were valuable? Yeah, so because no one has asked those questions, so people were like not thinking in those terms.
And okay, so as we come to this, at that time when you were reflecting on the case, what did you want to try? What were the questions that you thought you still needed answer for, and also what were the things you were already thinking of trying?
I was first of all thinking that how can we establish the connection between the work and the business outcomes? That's the first thing. Because the reason for that is because this gives motivation to people. Yeah. So I was thinking, first of all, let's establish that connection. And that's the reason I asked that question, which I said earlier, that why our last sprint or last two sprints were valuable to business. And I saw blank faces that we have.
Okay, so blank faces. I'm sure that you saw something a little bit more specific. Can you describe for us what you saw when you asked that question?
So, okay. So it was like we did these 80 user stories. Again, I asked the same question. Why did last two sprints, why do you think last two sprints were valuable for the business? Yeah.
And what
So,
did they
so,
exactly answer to that question? Like not your interpretation. What did you observe?
so what I observed was first answer was we did these many stories. And second answer was from the product owner that we have made significant progress onto in our plan, and that's valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So which basically tells me that there is a kind of knowledge gap, so to speak, or
What?
maybe.
Wait a minute. What do you mean by knowledge gap?
So okay, so progress on something is good, but then progressing on something is not value delivery. These
Okay,
are two different things.
I guess what you mean is progressing on a pre-existing plan is good, but it is not necessarily value delivery. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. Spot on. Yeah. So we can say we have made significant progress, no doubt about that. Appreciate it. But then the question still remains the same. Why those last two sprints were valuable to business,
Okay, but
not to the product owner, not to the team.
that was your question. The team had an answer to that. At least the PO had an answer.
Right.
It's valuable because we've progressed in a plan that we promised someone we would execute on.
Correct.
Okay, so it sounds to me that they are sponsor and team are talking across purposes here, because I hear you say that sponsor was worried about the impact of what they had developed, but the team and the product owner were more worried about delivering stuff according to plan.
Right. You are 100% correct.
So when you thought about, okay, so I see this contrast, maybe talking across purposes between team and stakeholders, how can I bring them together? Like what did you try at the time to get the team and the sponsor to kind of merge their view of what progress meant?
So first of all, what I did was having this discussion with the team, including the product owner, that how do we want to work? Yeah, because there are different ways in which we can work. For example, we can work on n number of stories. We can work on based on outputs. Yeah. The other way is we can focus on at least one outcome every sprint or every two sprints, if that's feasible. Yeah. Why? And I also given them the reason why, because our sponsor is looking for these outcomes. So now the question becomes, how can we as a team make him happy?
So when you look back, what are some of the things, and we're like entering into a little bit of brainstorming now.
Yep.
What are some of the things you wish you could have tried, or even think that you would try in the future should you come to the same situation again? So what
I
could you
think
try?
yeah, so there are a couple of things. First thing, what I'll try is uh, the working agreement and the team charter.
And how would you try those? Like what aspects of that are important in this context?
So I think working agreement is important because the team should be clear on what is expected from each of their team members, how they are going to measure themselves. Forget about everyone else. How they are going to measure themselves, and when can they call out the behaviors which are not acceptable, because there are some behaviors which team has to exhibit and some behaviors are not at all tolerable. Yeah. So that way, that will be helpful, I guess. And secondly, when we talk about the team charter, so working agreement is a part of it, and team charter covers a lot more topics than the working agreement itself. But yeah, so I'll start from there.
Okay, so working agreement and team charter. What else could you try should you come to this case in the future?
Perspective mapping. Now that I recollect the
Can you
word,
repeat that? I didn't hear.
perspective mapping.
Perspective mapping. Why would that be important?
That would be important because, as we have discussed just now, the concept of value is very different to different people. Value to a stakeholder might mean something different. Value to a product owner might mean different, and value to a team member might mean different. So let's talk about it. What do we exactly mean when we say we have made progress? Yeah. And and how are we going to gauge our performance or our sprint performance? Because one way to measure, that's a terrible metric, but still one way to measure is planned versus completed work. Yeah. So the perspective mapping exercise helps stakeholders and the team to be on the same page most of the time.
At least regarding specific aspects, and you were raising the aspect of aligning on what value means.
Exactly.
What else could you
Exactly.
try?
What else?
By the way, while Varun thinks about a different alternative, the tip here is when you're coaching someone, they have to come up with a minimum of 3 different, significantly different options, because otherwise we're not engaging our creative mind.
So that means I have to engage my creative mind. Come on, get
Correct.
on. Okay. So, what else I could try? Now that you have put me under pressure, so my creative mind has stopped working, I guess.
Okay, so
So,
let's review some of the things. So establish
yes.
connection between work and business outcomes.
Yep.
Discuss with the team and PO on how we want to work. That's similar to working agreements.
Yep.
There's perspective mapping.
One more thing I just remembered was user story mapping exercise. That can be very helpful, and I have found it extremely useful when people talk about the release planning or forecasting. Yeah, that what is the most important thing to be done, and what is an MVP and things like that.
So what related to that and in the line of understanding value, one of the things that comes to mind is the use of impact mapping. Impact mapping
Yes.
is a team, uh, let's say, shared understanding creation tool that is
Mm-hmm.
typically used by product people, but can also be used by together with stakeholders and team members to define what are the number of options we have to reach a specific goal. And here we would need to have that goal defined, but then selecting one strategy to reach that goal, right? That's what impact mapping helps us with. So that's something that comes to mind as well. Of course, there's some pre-work that is needed, which is to define that business goal, which was the first idea that we talked about.
Yeah. 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 Impact mapping is a really another helpful exercise which we can try.
Okay, so we've listed a few options, and there's actually 5 different options here, which is great. The more the better. I usually use the rule of a 5-minute brainstorming, and we write as many as possible. The reason for that, of course, is that we want to be able to measure the impact of different things, and if we only have 1 or 2 ideas, we're not really measuring the impact of those things. We're just speculating. But now when we have 5, we can kind of compare them and try to figure out. So should you meet this situation in the future, which of these 5, remembering that these 2 are basically the same, which of these 5 would you like to try out?
You want only one?
Only
Because
one.
I have two in mind.
No, only one.
Only one.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
running an experiment. That's actually the goal of the coaching session, is to come out of the coaching with an experiment. And of course, one experiment is on one strategy. We could have multiple strategies and then we would have to design multiple experiments, but it's always better to start with one. And if you already have 2 in mind, choose the one that is the fastest to implement. Not the biggest impact, the fastest, where you could get the fastest results.
Fastest feedback.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think the second one, discuss with the team plus PO, yeah, on how we want to work. Because what I have seen in practice, when you have this discussion, people don't resist this. That
What do
how
you
we
mean?
want to work.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is when you have the user story mapping, for example, yeah, user story mapping or another exercise, then people sometimes respond saying that we have the product backlog already built, we have the project plan, and etc. etc. You know, but then on the contrary, on the other side of the thing, when you ask that how do we want to work, I feel people are more interested in these things. That how do we want to work as a team? Because uh, as the saying goes, that everybody wants to be in a winning team. Yeah. So
Absolutely. And also, there's one aspect to that is how we want to work is a conversation that has the potential, at least, of raising expectations from multiple parties, right? So the
yes.
team members, the product owner, and if you involve the stakeholder, also the stakeholder. And that's really important because we want to make sure, as coaches and Scrum Masters, we want to make sure that that everybody hears other people's expectations, right? Not their own
Exactly.
expectations, but other people's expectations. And of course, for that, to make sure that they do hear, it's very good for us to try to reiterate what they said in the form of an expectation. Things like, Varun, I hear that you expect that discussing with the team NPO about how to work will help them surface the lack of alignment in, how to measure progress without you having to raise it.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
So now we need to define an experiment. So the overall headline for this experiment is discuss with the team and the PO how we want to work. And now we need to define the experiment. So the experiment has 4 clauses. We're only going to work on the first 3 now, which is what you do, literally what you are going to do. Even a list of tasks is good here. Second, what you expect, so the outcome of that experiment. And then third, what is the data you will collect to validate that you got what you expected, right? So let's start with the first one. What will you do, literally, in order to discuss with the team and the PO how we want to work?
I guess, first of all, schedule the meeting.
Yeah.
First of all. Yeah.
And what title will you give that meeting?
Something funny and interesting.
Okay, let's write one, or let's at least come up with one option for that.
My winning team, the title of the meeting.
My winning team. Okay, very good.
Yeah, because I've been in part of multiple teams, but this is my winning team. Yeah.
All right. So schedule a meeting with the title My Winning Team.
Yep. And then I would expect at least 80% or 90% of the people accept the invite, because it's their meeting, so participation is very important.
Okay. So besides scheduling the meeting, what else will you do?
Okay, so that's an interesting one. So before scheduling the meeting, what I'll do is I'll have this discussion with the team beforehand. That I am thinking of having this discussion or brainstorming, so to speak. What do you guys think? Yeah, so that it gives me an idea, or the pulse check. Yeah.
And what do you expect to get from that conversation?
What I expect to get is not much, but if there are any obvious resistance kind of thing, if there are some people who absolutely hate the idea, so that is what I want to get, because uh, generally speaking, most of the people are okay with this.
So how will you prepare that pre-meeting conversation with the team?
There can be multiple things, uh, but my preferred way is to collect the data that our sprints tells us this kind of last 5 sprints data, for example. Yeah, that our sprints tells us this story, that we are working really hard, and still we have some stakeholders who are not happy, and we don't clearly understand how our work creates value to the business, and are we improving, are we not improving, things like that. Yeah, so based on that data, I will have those discussions.
Okay, so what I hear you say is you will look at the data, and from the data you will evaluate if there is enough to corroborate the view from the stakeholders that the work being done doesn't necessarily relate to the business goals, and that the data does not show significant improvement?
Yes, yes. So it is not that black and white. Just to be clear, when I say get the data and have this discussion with people, so it is more like asking people questions, that this is what I have collected and this is what I have observed. What do you think? Because I might be observing something which is irrelevant, possibly. Yeah. So I will have this kind of
Okay.
two-way conversation.
So what data will you collect prior and during the meeting?
So prior to meeting, I have already just said, like, the sprint data and how the reviews went, clarity in terms of work to goals and things like that. So those are the kind of building blocks towards the meeting.
And what would be the sprint data that you were to collect?
I would collect the sprint data in terms of, uh, that's a good question actually. So I would collect if they have some sprint goal, some sort of sprint goal, whether that's a shopping list or whatever that is. Yeah. So I'll collect that sprint goals look like this. Yeah. Whether these are goals or not, that's immaterial. This is the real data. Yeah. And maybe burn downs if they have. Yeah. So those things, and how people uh, feel about working in sprints, general kind of happiness factor, how our reviews have gone.
And
So
regarding the reviews, you said you would collect the clarity on the goals. What else?
I think it's more about, I mean, clarity on the goals is one aspect, but then how our reviews are going, which basically means, are we getting feedback on our work or we are just demonstrating? Because demo is different and getting feedback is different.
Absolutely.
So so those kind of things. And obviously, not to miss or not to mention, I think, the stakeholder happiness, how are they feeling?
Okay.
Because
And then one last question for me, though, regarding this experiment. So you would do all of this, collect the data, have the conversation, schedule the meeting, having the meeting. After you had the meeting,
yes.
what was the impact? What did you expect to observe after the meeting?
So I okay. So what I expect the impact, or I think the reason why we are having this meeting is that we can have clarity towards our bigger purpose, not just a sprint, but our bigger purpose. Secondly, I expect the clarity in terms of why we exist as a team. We are working, that's good, but why do we exist as a team? And this all, and another way to put this is, if we don't turn up tomorrow, would anyone notice and would it matter?
All right. So let's quickly review this experiment.
Yep.
So the reason why we define experiments as the outcome of a coaching session is that, of course, the goal of a coaching session is to have action to take. We only learn if our ideas work by actually trying them in practice, and an experiment is a structured and accountable way to try something and then seeing if we got what we expected. So we list what you do. So you schedule the meeting, you have that discussion before the meeting, and you collect data on the sprints to prepare that conversation. then you expect that 80 to 90% of people show up in the meeting or at least accept the invite. You expect that the conversation before the meeting might highlight some obvious resistance and you would know who. And you expect that after the meeting, the team has clarity over the bigger purpose and the team has a clear answer to why do we exist as a team. The data you will collect is sprint data. You listed some ideas here, and of course the data from the review. So clarity on goals, are we getting feedback, and stakeholder happiness. And of course, if this was a case in the future, we would write down, okay, so by September 15th, we will come back together and review the result of this experiment, analyze it, and so on. Finally, every coaching session ends with these 3 questions. I will ask the coachee, do you have a good idea of what you want to try? If not, then we review the experiment again and maybe make it more clear. Are you committed to taking action? This is very important, right? This is the goal of every coaching session, is to have that commitment, the self-commitment to take action. I know what to do and I'm convinced it's the right step to take right now. And finally, when will we come together and review the results of what you did? And if necessary, pivot the experiment, right? Because if we run the experiment and then something completely different from what you expect happens, then we need to assess, why did it happen? What might this mean? What could I try next, right? But that's the whole process of the coaching session. Before we adjourn though, Varun, looking at the experiment, is something here that obviously wrong that you would like to change?
I don't think there is anything obviously wrong. No.
Okay, cool. So that means at the end of the coaching session, we do have an experiment, and hopefully, Varun, you're committed to taking action when the case arises in the future.
100%.
Very good.
Yeah.
And obviously, whenever we take action, it's very important to come back together with an accountability partner, which might be another Scrum Master or Agile coach in your organization, or it might be a coach like me that is helping you progress in your career. And coming together with that person is very important, because it is that aspect of being confronted with what happened that drives the self-accountability we need in order to grow in our profession as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches.
Yep.
Right, Varun. So the coaching session is over, but I do want to ask before we adjourn, what was your experience of this coaching session?
My experience was, uh, in one word, I can say enlightening. Yeah, that because it was not like I don't know anything, whatever we talked about. But then when we discuss with fellows, with colleagues, yeah, and people like yourself, so it's more of like sounding board. Yeah, so that is very very enlightening, and then you think in your own mind that, oh yeah, this can be tried. Yeah, that way we can look at it. so so I would say this was very helpful. Yeah.
All right. So if you would talk to a friend that is having a thorny problem to solve, would you recommend that they should seek out a coach or a accountability partner? And if so, why? How would you argument that?
If my friend has sore knee problem, yeah.
So let's say that you're talking to someone that has a similar problem, right?
Yeah.
And they say, I don't know what to do. There's this thing, and stakeholder, peer product owner, and so on. What would you advise them to do?
Okay, so I would advise them to talk to a fellow uh, colleague or a friend who has similar experience. Yeah, because sometimes, as I have realized just now, that it's all in yourself. You know the answers. It's just that sometimes someone has to act as a mirror in front of you, and that's where coaching becomes so powerful.
Absolutely.
So
And I
yeah,
think this is a very important statement because that's what we should be doing with our teams as well, right? Like we should be doing this and we ourselves should believe that the team knows what to do. I just
yeah.
need to be their coach. I need to help them figure it out. And of course, we can make suggestions. There's nothing wrong with making suggestions. Have you thought
Hmm,
about what if, right? What have you
hmm.
tried in the past that worked? What have you tried in the past that didn't work? Like those kinds of questions will trigger that ability to think and come to the next course of action.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah.
All right, Varun, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vasco. It was very good discussing things with you. Thank you.